Hey everybody. Hey everybody. Welcome to Sound Bombing. I created this show for people who want to experience a radical, life-changing journey through the sounds of my diverse guests. I hope that each sound you hear on this show will strengthen your faith, encourage your dreams, and challenge you to awaken the greatness within you.
Drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We come to drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. The bomb.
This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
Ladies and gentlemen, the star of the show,
LaMarr Darnell Shields.
At 16, I wanted to die. Now I'm 22 and sometimes I still want to. Only I'm afraid to try to. No one understands. You don't understand what it feels like to live in this body. This body is a vessel, struggling to contain all of my pain. I have a lot of pain. More than you realize. More than one's shoulders could bear. See, it started when I was 5, 6, 7. I watched my family feud. And there was nothing I could do as a child. As a child surrounded by so much anger. At 9, I fell in love with dancing. But fat kids don't dance, they said. I was body shamed, and their words cut me deeper than knives could on bare skin, and I've held on to those scars for years. Just long enough to starve myself at age 12. At age 12, I ate only what was necessary to feel skinny. Thinking maybe I can just shed off the memories. At 16, I wanted to die. And now I'm 22 and sometimes I still want to. Only I'm afraid to try to. Would you miss me if I did? Would you feel sorry for bullying me like you did? Would you? I know that I will get better. I'm not sure when or how, but I will. One day.
Wow, somebody say mental health is real. Welcome to Drum Call, the crisis of Black suicide and mental health. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. LaMarr Darnell Shields, the creator of Sound Bombing. And my goal with my podcast is to introduce you to the people with ideas that will help you unlock your full potential. Why do we call this session Drum Circle? Or why do we call it the drum or playing the drum? Because drum circles are known and valued for helping people connect through music, through celebrating life, through a drumming experience, from promoting spirits of participation. African hands and drums are played to communicate, to celebrate, to mourn, and to inspire. They are played in times of peace. They are played in times of war. They're planting and harvesting birth and death. Drums have been such a large part of African culture. They've been a large part of my culture. They've been a large part of our culture. Drumming pulses throughout the collective unconsciousness. So welcome to the Drum Call. The question today is this: what happens at the intersection of mental health and one's experience as a member of the African American community? While experiencing being Black in America, it varies tremendously, and there are shared cultural experiences that play a role in helping define mental health and supporting well-being, resiliency, and healing. And so part of this shared cultural experience, family connections, values, expressions through spirituality or music, reliance, community, and religious networks are enriching and can be a great source of strength and support. However, another part of this shared experience is facing racism, discrimination, inequality that can significantly affect a person's mental health, being treated or perceived as less than because of your color, because of the color of your skin, it can be stressful. Listen, know the facts. Adult Black and African Americans are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than white folks. More likely to attempt suicide than white folks. Less likely to receive care. Higher frequency of racial microaggressions negatively predicted mental health. African Americans often receive poor quality of health care and lack of therapy. So today we are playing the drum. Today you're going to join me, and thank you for joining me in a discussion. I've invited 3 of the dopest people, well, actually 2 of them because Thabiti Boone is having some technical difficulties, but I invited several of the dopest people on the planet. These are my people. These are my friends. These aren't just people that I just Googled. These are people that I spend time with. These are people that I have relationship with. These are people who are husbands, wives. These are people who are parents. These are people who are elders in the village. These are people who heeded the call to the drum. And my first guest comes from the great city of Chicago. We were celebrating Women's History Month today, so we had to start out with one of the dopest women on the planet. I'm talking about Dr. Ballin A. Durr. She's provided care largely to the vulnerable, uninsured, underserved in a variety of clinical settings, including as the director of the acute child and adolescent psychiatry and inpatient unit of the hospital in Lexington, Kentucky, a private practice. She's had a groundbreaking role in providing telepsychotherapy through Illinois for almost a decade at Martha's Youth Center. She's traveled the country. She is graduated from the great Emory University with a BA in sociology. She has obtained her medical degree from the University of Illinois at Chicago, completed 9 months of pediatrics and Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, New York, and completed the general psychiatry residency and child adolescent psychiatry residency at the University of Florida. I want to bring my girl into the building. Put your hands together to my girl, Dr. Ballin A. Durr, MD, in the building. What's up, homegirl? How are you?
Good morning. I am fantastic. How you doing?
I am great. You know, somebody's probably wondering, how could I have so much energy? Because we're going to talk about mental health and suicide. Because I got 2 of the dopest people who I know that are experts in this field, who also have had their own personal challenges in this field. And so I'm so excited you're here. Just let our listeners, and you're no stranger to the sound bombing community. You participated in the International Women of Color Summit, where we had women from all over the country. You were the first person I brought into the space with my partner, Dr. Marina Gilmore, when COVID hit 2 years ago. And I said, Doc, people are calling me from all over the planet. And I think when they see PhD, they think I got an MD. Listen, all I could do is what them Black nurses do at the Black church. All they got is Epsom salt, smelling salt, and they got some orange juice. I don't know if they can take care of anybody or they got some prayer hands, but I knew who I would call. Let the folks know what we're going to talk about before I bring up my next guest into the room.
So what I discovered over a career that's more than 20 years. And as you mentioned, I am a medical doctor. My specialty is child adolescent psychiatry. So I'm board certified in child adolescent adult psychiatry. And again, have been doing this for over 20 years. And what I have discovered through my interactions and conversations with people is that what's missing is an understanding of the essential and frankly critical nature of brain health. That there is why people understand that if you're brain dead, you're done. You're just, you're done. But what's missing, therefore, is the connection to the awareness and the understanding and then the action that would follow from that awareness and understanding, that our brain is then running everything that we do except simple reflexes. So if my brain is, running my mood, my judgment, my organization, my higher thinking, my impulse control, my judgment, it would make sense then if my brain isn't working, if my brain is ill, that there's going to be some impairment in some of those areas, if not many of those areas. So if if we understand how important, how critical, frankly, brain health is, then what are the things that I need to do to take care of my brain? So, I like to think, so I think to myself, then why are we stigmatizing the command center, right? Why are we stigmatizing getting health for the brain, which is running everything? So to me, mental health stigma is just crazy as hell.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? I should have warned my guests that you and my next guest are brilliant. So let me tell you right now, I'm gonna give you all about a minute to go and get a pen and a pad. I don't know if you need to write with mascara, if you need to write with some chalk, if you need to write with some coloring paper, some pencils, because they are going to be bringing it. So I'm telling you right now, get it right now. So I got to bring up my next brother. This is my brother. He represents Omega Psi Phi. He is a man of God. He is my big brother. He is a microphone fiend like I am. He can quote and read. This dude quote and read folks back and forth. Who am I talking about? My man, Dr. Kevin Washington Mawata-Kariri, founder and CEO of so many things we're going to talk about. The inquiry into the human soul is a delicate process, and it's it requires a devotion and seriousness of purpose. And that's what Dr. Kevin Washington brings to an African-centered psychology, an African-centered psychologist licensed in the state of Florida and Washington, D.C., engaged in the inquiry to the human soul. He has taught and lectured at several colleges, nationally and internationally. He's been on Roland Martin, part of Essence Magazine, BET, News Network, Vocal Point, NBC, and many other national and international organizations. He is a past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, as well as the former dean past of Imani Temple Cathedral. Currently is an assistant professor at the greatest institution on this planet, the Black and Gold, yes, Grambling State University. No disrespect to anybody else. Of course, you know how HBCU folks are. He's a national director of Black Marriage Day and the president of Black Mental Matters. Put your hands together for my man, my big brother, Dr. Kevin Washington in the building. Dr. Washington, how you doing, brother?
Hey, brother, I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here, Dr. Durr. Thank you for dropping the science. It is important that we understand the connection between the brain and human function. And brother Darnell, thank you for this opportunity to come together, right? Because every time we come and have these sessions, it is enriching just to have a discourse about the work that we do. But more importantly, it is healing because the repair comes through doing the work. I have never seen anybody not engage in something to help somebody else without being helped along the way. And so this is always food or good medicine. The Native Americans talk about good medicine, and we think that medicine comes in a pill or a tablet, but medicine comes in relationships, comes in contact, how we come together in spaces like this. So this is good medicine. So Dr. Durr, you are good medicine on this day. So thank you so much.
Well, we want to honor
Dr. And I want to say thank you, Dr. Washington. I'm so glad to be able to meet you and to be able to connect and to be able to have this conversation. And frankly, I think we great medicine. All of us together make great medicine.
That's what's up.
I knew the two of you all would be dope together. I wish Thabiti, who is also your frat brother, who's in New York, Thabiti, he's having some technical issues. Wanted him into the space because Thabiti witnessed his mother attempt suicide, and we're going to talk a little bit about that piece. But I want to get started. You know, this issue or this topic of mental health has always been in the front of my mind, both of you all, not in the back of my mind. And I must admit, when I saw my person who I met, I'm not going to call her my good friend, but I've met her. I met her because I grew up with her watching TV. I met her at the NAACP Image Awards. Her name is Regina King. And Kevin and Ballin, when I saw Regina King, the great actress that we watched, many of us watched grow up, when I watched her, when I read the news about her son, Ian Alexander Jr., who committed suicide, who was like her ride or die. He was her plus one. They always spent time together. And then, Kevin, I looked up and what happened in New York, and I saw Miss USA 2019 Chelsea Chris, who decided to jump off a building in New York. And then I thought about a Howard University man who is from Chicago by way of St. Louis, who has one of the most eloquent voices on this planet. Don't get it twisted. Kevin, who am I talking about? Who am I talking about? I ain't said his name yet. Who also committed suicide when I was a young man who jumped out of his hotel room. He used to sing with a woman named Roberta Flack. Who am I talking about?
Not Donny Hathaway.
I'm talking about the great Donny Hathaway. When I saw a brother who was the mayor of a small town in Maryland, Dr. Washington, I can't think of his name, but when they put it in the news, they said an openly gay Black mayor committed suicide. And I started to see that somebody has to have a conversation. Somebody with some credentials, somebody that's Black, somebody that understands our culture. And so I decided to bring you all back to the sound bombing community, because a lot of people need some support. And I want to start with this. I want to talk about the big elephant in the room. Let's address the stigma around mental health. Dr. Washington, why is there such a stigma around mental health when historically people of African descent, we've always sat in circles. We've always had conversations. Our Native American brothers and sisters, they've always sat in circles and had conversations. Why is there such a stigma around mental health? And then Dr. Durr, you can follow up as well.
So I ground my conversation around the stigma of mental health with the Eurocentric worldview perspective, right? So the idea that we've grown up in a space where we've been marginalized, brutalized, talked about, dehumanized. And so to say that I have a problem, to say that I have some anomalies, something is wrong with me, is yet another fault that I'm carrying. So we already carry the stigma, the issue of bad hair. We already carry the issue, and you mentioned earlier about colorism. Our skin is not right, so we got fair skin. We have all of these things upon us at one time in a society. So to say that I have a mental problem, when all I have to do, according to the religious teachings, is just turn it over to God and everything will be okay. So my faith then is called into question. We even have pastors to say that you don't need a psychiatrist, psychologist, all you need is Jesus, right? And so all of these things compound upon an individual to say that it must be me, I'm the problem. And so rather than deal with the issues of the world, I simply get rid of the problem, which is me, and thus suicide becomes the option. So we have to then move beyond this idea of the stigma of mental health. Understand that even in our religious narratives, we have clear indications of counsel. If we have a narrative of Yeshua, Jesus talking to the young man and the demons jump out of his body, that was a counseling, a therapeutic session. If we have the woman with the issue of blood, she said, if I get to touch the hem of his garment, that's a therapeutic moment. So the point is that it's replete with examples, even in our Christian examples, but we can find it in all of them, that people have found ways to seek counsel. But the stigma goes back to your question. We carry stigma in large part, in my opinion, because we are afraid to admit that we have yet one more problem, one more issue, one more deficit to work through. And so we just simply say that, brush that aside and move forward. The second part is, during enslavement, we never had time to sit down, to be sick, to be tired. You have to keep on moving, keep on pressing. So our narrative is about keep on keeping on, right? I got to move on, because why? There's so many things happening that we got to find a way to get through. And the third part is that there is something of strength, a divinity within, a power to make something out of nothing that is there. And sometimes our greatest strength can be our weakness. And a clear example is that we were able to take guts and make them into chitlins. So we took nothing. We took mess, the S-O-L-E, and made it S-O-U-L by our essence. So the point is that it's a great strength. But if it's not checked, your great strength can be your greatest weakness.
Dr. Durr?
So to really, I think just to reinforce what Dr. Washington is saying. So one, I also wanted to share with people that I also have a minor in African American Studies and the author of the book, Heaven Abounds in You, The Journey to Joy. And I therefore teach from the intersection of mind, body, medicine, science, and spiritual well-being, understanding the cultural context that we reside in this country. So one, I think that we need to understand that, as Dr. Washington was saying, is that we were dehumanized and brought to this country as a commodity for the profit, power, and pleasure of a small number, a small few. And what is the purpose, to bring it to kind of current day? What is the purpose of trash talking? You know what the purpose of trash talking is? I call it the 3 Ds, right? Disturb, distract, and defeat. So I'm talking about you in order to disturb your peace. I'm talking about you in order to distract you from your purpose. And in doing those things, disturbing you from distracting you from your purpose and your understanding of who you are, then I defeat you, because I've taken control of your mind. And what does Carter G. Woodson say? If you control what a man thinks, you never have to worry about what he does. And then to paraphrase the rest of it, if you convince a man that he is inferior, then you don't have to tell him to go to the back door. He will go to the back door on his own. And if there is no back door, his very nature will demand one. So we need to understand things in that context, that if I can tell you who you are, which is what the purpose of, how do you, and I heard this on the remake of Roots, coming from the overseer. And for me, it was a drop the mic moment. He said, you can't buy a slave. You got to make a slave.
Wow.
Wow. Right?
If I was in church, I'd be shouting right now.
That's what I say. Can the church say amen? Right? Well, so how do you do that? You remove their identity, right? You tell them this is what your name is. This is what language you can speak. This is what your culture and your traditions are. You don't allow them to practice their religions. You remove everything from them as much as possible, and then you instill into them who you're, who I say you are. You can do what I say you can do. And so from that disconnect, and of course, it's all designed to keep you as a commodity in order to make me rich, again, to satisfy my profit, power, and pleasure. So therefore, you've now got a disconnect from knowing who I am, from knowing that as a spiritual being who lives in this physical body, what do I need to do, or how do I operate this thing? How do I run this thing? Well, as I said, since we are the God potential appearing in an infinite number of physical forms, you, me, Dr. Washington, all of our listeners, the air, the water, it's just all God in a physical form, but I don't understand that, then I'm developing my sense of identity and purpose from outside of me instead of within me. Not understanding that who I am is the God potential within, then it has to flow through the filter, has to demonstrate through the filter of a human brain. So it is therefore the filter or the interface between the internal world and the external world. And if it's not operating properly, then my ability to do so, to demonstrate my fullest potential, to do what I'm here to do, to have the most control, I mean, from me understanding that, mental health is not only brain health, but it's also the thoughts I think, that I have control over that. I have will, and I'm exercising that will in every choice that I make and creating results in every choice that I make. So there's that disconnect, that disconnect from within here, because we're trained and conditioned to seek that which is outside of me, whether it's a relationship, whether it's money, whether it's a certain house or car, a certain profession, status, fame, all of those things which are temporary, not understanding that who I am and what's most valuable is that within me that is eternal. And so that's where I think the real issue is that disconnect, in addition to us know more and more. I think the average person knows more about how to run their car, operate their car, than they do their own brain and their own body.
Yeah, and I want to jump into, I want to stay on that vein, because what I'm hearing you say is, both of you say, that racism is bad for your mental health. That's what I'm hearing you say. And as I think about that, I think about a lecture that I attended, Dr. Washington. The sister did a session with a group of young people, and she pulled up a slide and it says, racism is bad for your mental health. And then Dr. Washington and Dr. Durr, she had an image of Dr. King on the slide. And she asked the young people, what do you think about when you see Dr. King? And of course, the young people was like an activist. He was a leader. He was a teacher. He was a minister. And they had all these things. And then she went on to say, and she had just learned this recently, she said, but did you know at the age of 13, he had attempted to commit suicide? Did you know that he struggled with mental health? So Dr. Washington, I hear this concept that racism is bad for your mental health. If that statement is true, what do we then do with that? What do we do with a statement like that? And what do we do with, what questions do we then ask ourselves to then combat whatever that message is?
So it's important to understand that the truth will make you free. And too often we live in the context of a lie. And Dr. Durr hit some very powerful points. In the ancients of Kemet, they said that Anuka Sar every day. Anuka Sar means I am divine. But if your message and your program, it suggests that you're somehow inferior, that you're less than, that you're not a divine being, then there is some program that has to be rectified and acknowledged and has to be changed. And we don't have the course correction going on. She also mentioned something I think is very important about the brain health. Understand that when we encounter dynamics of racism, they do activate various neurochemicals, acetylcholine and dopamine, so other things. And so those things are part of the entire process. So when the allostatic load gets high, that means that when there's certain things that come up on the body that causes some serious disruption that I cannot filter the content of racism, of being devalued, nothing there. The brain does kick in, and it does create these neurochemicals. Many times, I tell the students all the time that the reason why you're trying to get high is because you feel low. The question is, why do you feel low? Right? Because if you're already up, you can't get any higher. So we then ingest neurochemicals, right? So there's this heavy consumption of cannabis in this area. This era. And so the question is, why? What are you trying to mask? Understanding that there's already dopamine in your body, so you're already a dope from the factory, right? So all these things are already there. And so when we begin to talk about how racism impacts how your brain functions, and your brain then is the source of the neurochemicals, which nobody can even explain why the chemicals are there. That's even heavy right there. That's the part about the divinity, the God potential that was talked about, because even though there's an anatomical thing called the brain, the way that it functions is always divine. But the point I'm making here is that when we begin to understand that racism causes a great deal of duress psychologically, how we see ourselves, and then it makes us want to escape. We can then understand why people want to then seek suicide. I suggest that many times the brothers out here who are killing one another is really suicide by homicide. The issue is that I desire to get out anyway. And so we even hear the singer saying that about a change is going to come. Sam Cooke says that I'm too afraid to die. That song said a lot. And he said that after he came to visit Shreveport, Louisiana, which you know a lot about, being at Grambling State University, when he was impacted by the horrific nature of racism. So the issue is for our people to understand that when we have these psychological fronts coming against us, that speaks to our inferiority, understand that the body is seeking to fight or flight, to adjust, to make some things happen. Adrenaline is kicking in. Adrenaline is trying to make sure the body can engage in battle. And if this does not get worked out, because adrenaline doesn't disappear, it causes other problems. It makes one desire simple sugars, and that leads to obesity, and so forth and so on. Cortisol level increases, and that leads to a plaque building up in the arteries, can cause high blood pressure, but also later can cause one to suffer from coronary heart disease. And it started from trying to deal with the issues of racism. So I will pause there and allow Dr. Durr to move forward with that conversation at a deeper level. But I just wanted to simply say that racism is bad for your mental health. Racism is the major cause of death of people of African descent, because when you begin to examine the anomalies that we have, from hypertension, from diabetes to high cholesterol, we can link them all back to racism. And the last thing I got to say, this one, that as you mentioned, roots, is that we took people to the Gambia this past summer. We're going back this summer. The place where Roots is said to have been the storage center. We're doing work in that community, but that's not why I brought this up. I brought this up because when I was there in the Gambia for 2 weeks, the love handles that I have diminished within a month. And it was amazing that it was not my goal to go lose weight. But I realized.
Are you talking about you, Dr. Washington? As thin and slim as you are, brother?
Brother, we all know our spots. And so
as my mother calls it, excess goodness.
Yeah, we all know where our thing is, right? And so there was actually, when I went back home, I had lost 20 pounds. Now there was no effort to lose 20 pounds. I was two something when I left. I came back at 180. But the point I'm making is that I was not dealing with the dynamics of racism and oppression every single day. I tuned into certain things, but that wasn't always on my mind. That wasn't always something that was at the forefront. And I realized firsthand that people say sugar. It's not the sugar. The sugar is a part of the process. It's not the bread. It's not cholesterol. It's the psychological aspect of dealing with being traumatized day in and day out and never having a chance to filter that and talk about those things to get healed. That's the major. So racism is a major killer. And I can tell you that when I went to the Gambia, and another brother had the same experience, Umar Johnson. Dr. Umar Johnson went to the Gambia, lost weight within 2 weeks. It just did disappear like that. Why? Because there's certain things we're not having to deal with. But if you're never outside of this space, you never know that it's like trying to tell a fish what water is. We're always dealing with it. But it's when you don't have to, it changes your entire life. Racism
Dr.
kills.
Washington, somebody listening right now, they're saying right now, so you need, I'm trying to get into this dress for the prom. I'm trying to get into this wedding dress. So I need to go to Africa so I can slim up and I can take care of this body. Right, Doc? Is that what
I'm saying? We take folks to Africa so that they can get their minds right, right?
And then the body will follow. Dr. Durr, I have a different question. It has to do with questions in general. 2 questions that I know that people always ask about suicide. And I want you to respond to this. Why did they do it? And then why didn't I see the signs? Talk to me about those 2 questions.
So if I could, and I certainly want to talk to you about those 2 questions.
Go ahead, you want to respond to that?
But I want to provide some deeper understanding to what Dr. Washington was saying about.
Y'all like, I ain't gonna answer your question. I'm gonna talk about something else. No, go ahead, Doc.
No, I'm gonna answer it. I want the audience to have a deeper understanding of why stress kills. Yes. And I think somebody sometimes just saying that to you, go, yeah, okay, and keep it moving, because you don't understand. And I think that when you have an understanding of something, then you're better able to utilize it. Like, as I like to say, you don't go out to your car every day and try to figure out how to start it. You know how to start it, therefore you're able to execute and do that consistently every time. So just in the and I'll try to keep it short, which is basically we do have brain chemicals that would somebody saying that would be me. Marquita, thank you for that. That we do have brain chemicals, and that's something that in terms of, I think also is a great understanding to have, is that for every thought and for every action that takes place in the brain, there are chemicals associated with that in order for that to occur. It's a chemical and electrical happening that takes place in the brain. And so some of those chemicals are stress chemicals, which Dr. Washington mentioned, like cortisol. And when you have stress chemicals being released chronically over time, as opposed to there's the tiger, or there's something that happens to you stressful that happens, sometimes and then goes away, then that's allowed to recede. But when you're in a situation like we are, which is the stress is chronic as a person of color, a Black person, an African-American person, it's this chronic, it's every day, constantly. So then those chemicals are not allowed to recede. And what happens is those chemicals then damage the body over time. So emotional dis-ease becomes physical disease. What does that look like in the brain? Well, what it looks like in the brain is that you can have inflammation in the brain. Inflammation is a part of most disease processes. What that looks like, and Dr. Washington mentioned it, that's a part of how a plaque builds up in your blood vessels. And the inflammation, because the plaque is trying to cover over the inflammation. And then as the plaque builds up, it either cuts off the blood flow or it breaks off someplace down the stream, maybe causing a heart attack or causing a stroke. So that's why inflammation matters. Number 2, then there is also you can get a decrease in blood flow, which then if you get a decrease in blood flow or a decrease in the production of brain chemicals like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin, then that, and also what they call BDNF, which is basically a chemical that helps the brain cells grow. So basically when that happens, you get cell death, brain cell death. And then you get depression, then you get anxiety, then you get a portion of the brain that takes over with the negative thinking. So I want people to understand that there is actually a chemical reaction or chemical process that's happening in the brain that's creating depression and anxiety as a result of the chronic stress.
I thank you for, I'm gonna joke you all the time, but I
Okay.
do for giving some clarity on that, because again, what I love about the two of you all, I mean, the approaches are so similar, and it's almost like Dr. Washington is passing you the ball, you're gonna dump the layup, you're gonna give it back. And that's why I want the two of you all in the space. And again, I wish that we're gonna try to bring Thabiti in a second and see if his technology is working. So I love that you said that, because it's so much bigger than what people, girl, stop acting crazy, girl, just get over it, man, stop. It's so much bigger than that. It's even when we look at our children. Now I put my research hat on. You know, my 14-year-old son, it makes sense for him to jump off, to play around with the, jump off with his bike from the top of the stairs, not trying to kill himself, but to take a skateboard and do, because his brain is not developed. It's not developed like another individual. And so I know that there's somebody, I want to go back to the other question, and both of you all can answer this, because I want to think about this. There's a parent, or there's a parent who lost a child, or there's someone that may be on the cuffs, as you saw the poem that opened up today about suicide. There are two questions, Doc, both of you all, that I hear all the time. Why did they do it? And why did not see the signs? And then another one is, if the person is wealthy, they had so much money. Why did they do that? So let's talk about these questions. Why do we ask those questions? And then maybe what questions should we be asking ourselves as we are reflecting on our own mental health, and also maybe our significant others, being our partners or to be our children. So I want one of you all to answer that. And then I have another question from Marquita Houston in the room. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things too, again, to bring to the awareness of people, suicide actually occurs almost 2 times as much as homicide does. So while the emphasis is placed upon homicide in our community, suicide is occurring at twice the rate. And so we need to understand how important it is. I want to talk about also the fact, again, that for me, Brenda, I can characterize mental health as both brain health and thought health. So from a brain health standpoint, and one of the things you already mentioned is, our brain doesn't fully develop until we're about 25 years old. One of those things being impulse control. And the time, they say, between the thought of being suicidal to actually making an attempt to commit suicide is about 10 minutes because of that lack of impulse control, right? It's also important to recognize that some of the contributors to the suicide is, frankly, depression. If you have some form of depression, or if you have bipolar depression, if you have some form of schizophrenia or psychosis, if you have an addiction, which then also disinhibits your impulse control, and frankly, the addiction hijacks the brain and associates it now with survival, which is usually food, eating, sexual reproduction, and social connections. Now it's associated with the use of the substance. In order for me I got to survive, and I need to use the substance in order to survive. So those kind of disturbances in the brain, because those are brain illnesses, then lead people to sometimes make attempts and to commit suicide. Obviously, there's the other social factors, right, that we've already talked about, which is the things that happen to you, including abuse, right? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, the bullying, being part of the LGBT community, and that ostracism and bullying. Those kind of stressors and the disconnect from connection to the one and to the community are also things that lead one to attempt suicide. People are in so much pain. Again, they just want the pain to stop. And the problem is, without again recognizing it like this, I've had, since high school, 4, 8, 5. So more than 13 years of training, frankly, and education, and then plus another 20 years of practicing. So my toolkit, my tool chest is one of those big ones like you see, the ones that stand like that, as opposed to the average person has more like the little bitty toolkit, and maybe they got a hammer and a screwdriver. They got a couple, 2 or 3 things in there. And instead of saying help is just help, meaning if I need help, it just means I need help. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with my character, that I'm weak, that I'm crazy, that I'm any of that stuff. It just means I don't have the tools to do this, and I don't know how to use the tools to do this. So let me go to someone and get help to use the tools, because this is no different than if I had a broken leg and I don't know how to fix the broken leg. Somebody, again, if they abuse you in some way or harm you in some way, they are responsible for breaking your leg or for harming you. But because it's your leg, it's your hurt, it's your pain, you're responsible for seeking the help to heal the wound.
So thank you for that. But if you just tuned in, we have Dr. Ballin Durr, Dr. Ballin Durr, MD, who is a psychiatrist. We have Dr. Kevin Washington, who is a psychologist. He's a professor at Grambling State University, traveled all over the country. If you are listening to us, we want to thank you. Just take a moment to thank you right now. If you have a question or a comment, bring them into the space. We will get you into the room. Dr. Washington, we have our little private chat. Doc, can you talk about some of the signs to look for? And then I know you do a lot of work with young people as well. Talk about the impact of suicide on children.
So the last thing Dr. Durr mentioned is I say that we have to understand who's to blame and who's responsible. It's important to understand that that racism, oppression, human denigration is indeed to blame for many of the challenges that we face. And we are responsible for the process of our own work, our own healing, and we have to know how to do that. And so one of the things that we don't do a good enough job of is have modalities for our healing that's grounded within our worldview, our way of thinking, our way of functioning. And we can talk more about that. Some of the signs that actually appear. Oh, and I want to clarify another point, Dr. Durr, is that stress is not the killer. I'm going to go back. I'm going to nail it down and say racism is the #1 killer of people of African descent, and stress is the response to racism. And that's critical, because once we realize that, then we can understand what we're going to do about it. Because if somebody keeps coming for you to tell you where you're inferior, the fundamental question becomes, why do they keep coming? They keep coming because they haven't won yet. And secondly, they see your greatness before you do. So the reality is, then, racism is an indicator of the greatness that we have within us. So some of the signs that we see is that people say, well, I didn't see it coming. He seemed to be so happy. Well, the question was, how was he or she responding before they felt up? See, because as was mentioned earlier, when one is depressed, one is often too down in the dumps, or too lack energy to be able to engage in the process of suicidal acts. That is, taking pills or by gun violence or anything else. But it's when one begins to start to feel up, to get some more energy, that may tell you that something has happened. That they found a way to escape. They're finding a way to relieve themselves of the pain. So it's always critical to understand, to watch patterns. And one thing that we don't do is that we don't observe patterns with one another. We ask the question, boy, what's wrong with you? You need to get it together. Well, the issue is, let's discuss what's happening when I feel like something is wrong with you. Why do you assume something is wrong, right? So that's being a habit of talking and engaging one another. The other thing to look for, critical in the process, is to not only when you see the energy shift, but to always attune yourself to the kind of conversations that are held. How are they analyzing things in the world when they engage in various play? What is happening as children? What are they doing with their particular dolls or animals or characters? How are they engaging? Because that tells you a lot about what they're thinking about. So one assignment was given to a 4 or 5-year-old. Just recent someone told me about this, and then the question it was about how did the butterfly come out of the cocoon, and the question was, the 4 or 5-year-old says, why does the butterfly want to kill itself? And it's like, what? How do you? It was the conversation was about the butterfly going from a caterpillar to chrysalis and so forth and so on. But that child heard something about suicide, which tells you that there's something happening in the psyche where she was seeing something that was about death and destruction. We have to be able to listen to the quality of the conversation that we're having with one another. Are we having morbid discourses? Are we engaging in conversation that speaks about activism or moving things forward? Or are we stuck in the past? And the third thing to be able to be in tune with is to always be able to understand who are in our children's lives, who's around. Are they isolated? Are they engaged in more introverted activities? And it's not as bad thing to be introverted. The question is, who is there to help them to be able to work through things? Because many times they may not tell us what's going on, but their associations can tell us what's going on. But if the associates are also in a funky place, then you have this funkiness going on in one space. So who are they engaging with? Who are they having sharing energy with? Always be attuned to that. And those are three easy things to do. The other work, is more clinical work. But I want people to know that when somebody has been feeling down and all of a sudden they begin to fill up, check in right there. If somebody tells you they thought about suicide, their conversation, check in right there. Stop. And also, who are they associating with? That tells you a lot about what's going on with them, because association brings on simulation. And so we only have people around us that are a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. So I wanted to just, again, be able to stop and check. There's so much more. Brother Darnell, I think that this is worth a broader, just several sessions, but we do have our students. As a matter of fact, at Graham State University, the students did what's called Wellness Wednesdays, their second discussion. No, their first discussion was about this topic of suicide, and they were deeply moved by Mr. Universe, the pageant winner, committed suicide. And by the time we got ready to set up to do this, when the sister out of Alabama had also committed suicide, so they were deeply moved by this topic, and they had the data to talk about it, and they were talking to their classmates about things to consider in post-COVID, and they were very clear about how these social issues are impacting how they're thinking about themselves. And so the young people were on point, and all of them even admitted that, yes, I have thought about it. I tried to commit suicide. I watched suicide in my family, and it's about 4 or 5 of them on the air, on the radio, talking about their own experiences with suicide and suicide attempts. So it was not something that was alien to them. As they came together to talk about the topic, it reminded them of what they were dealing with their own spaces. And what was cathartic for them was to be able to be in that space on the radio talking about what was happening, and then realizing that, yeah, it's a part of who we are. We all think this. And then they came up with strategies with how to make sure that you don't stay in that space. And they mentioned doing things with one another, building your business, constructing a reality, conceptualizing a way out, seeing these things possible, knowing who you're associated with. They came up with all these powerful tools to give to one another, and they were all spot on clinically. So I would submit that we have to listen to what they're talking about.
Speaking of listening, hold on, Dr. Durr, hold on for 1 second. I want to bring in my good friend Trevor Noah. He's gonna unpack a couple of things for us, and then I want you to respond to what he has to say.
Few groups who could stand to benefit from therapy more than Black people. I mean, think about all the things Black people have been through: slavery, segregation, winter, all equally traumatic experiences. But unfortunately, even as therapy has become more mainstream, the Black community has had a tough time getting the help that they need.
It's hard enough to get mental health treatment in the U.S., but studies show that racial and ethnic minorities are significantly less likely to receive mental health treatment than whites.
Black and Hispanic children are less likely to get mental health care than white kids. And studies show that irritability in the average white teenager is often labeled as depression. That same behavior is more likely to be seen as disruptive in Black or Latino children, and doctors say that can lead to feelings of hopelessness at a very young age.
Yes, one of the reasons many Black people don't get the proper treatment is misdiagnosis. What is seen as depression in white people can be seen as disruptive behavior in Black people. And this shouldn't be surprising, right? This kind of thing happens in medicine all the time, mixed diagnoses. It's like when a Black person has a seizure, it's a medical emergency. But when a white person does it, it's called dancing. But it turns out, even when Black people are properly diagnosed with mental health issues, it can still be a challenge to find a therapist who's equipped to handle their needs.
Making the crisis worse, not enough African American therapists. Today, only 4% of psychologists are Black.
Kevin Durden says admitting he needed help was actually easier than finding it. He saw 3 different therapists, but felt that none of them understood the stress and emotions unique to Black men.
When Taraji P. Henson's own son Marcel was struggling, she found it nearly impossible to find him one.
Trying to find a culturally competent therapist was like looking for a purple unicorn with a gold horn.
Do they understand the cultural context from which I'm coming from? Do they understand the culture that I live in?
So I want to talk to you about 2 things that Trevor Noah mentioned. So I want you to talk about misdiagnosis, Dr. Washington. You know, there's this overconsumption of medication for Black and brown children as a misdiagnosis. And then Dr. Durr, I want you to talk about what does it mean to find a therapist, like finding a therapist that looks, sounds, and walks like you. So Doc, let's talk about misdiagnosis, or either one you can take. Go ahead, Doc, you got it.
Well, one, I was just going to say to add in some of the other risk factors, because of course we do want people to have as much information as possible to recognize when people are at risk or if they themselves are at risk. One of those things that I had already mentioned was if you have a mental disorder, right? And I tell people, we got to remember, you have a brain that's ill, but you are not your brain. So, if you have a mental illness such as depression or anxiety or, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, addictions, those things will increase your risk. If you have made a previous suicide attempt, if you have a family member who has mental illness or who has attempted or committed suicide, if somebody famous, you can have people mimicking or copycatting that. Some of the things we've seen too, again, is with the pandemic, is the increase in the social isolation, right? The increase in the relationship problems and the conflict because of increase being in close quarters. But if you have relationship problems, if you've been abused, physical or sexual or the emotional abuse, those can also be risk factors. And again, if you have access to the means, so if you have access to a stockpile of pills, or if you have access to guns, or if you like one of the things, physicians is actually high on the list of those who attempt suicide. One of the reasons being, of course, is because they actually have access to the means to do so. And then the other would be, again, if you feel, if you're having suicidal thoughts, of course, right? So those are risks, some of the risk factors. And if you have health problems and chronic pain, those are other risk factors that for suicide as well.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for adding those in. So now I want to go back to the Trevor Noah clip. I saw both of y'all laughing some of the things he was saying, because sometimes you got to laugh at some of the sickness. Let's talk about misdiagnosis, Doc. I'm in schools all the time. I was just at the psychiatric center in Virginia speaking to some teachers, and most of them said these kids, they have behavior issues. They are not. They've been misdiagnosed. Let's talk about that amongst our children and adults as well.
So it's a powerful piece, right? So I want to say that my dissertation was on how to increase the number of African American psychologists. This was done right now about 15, 20 years ago. This is my dissertation topic. And it's amazing how that topic is still relevant to this day, that there's been little movement, even though the data suggested that certain things should be in place in certain schools, but they're not there. And so we talk about the misdiagnosis. It's often easy to do because of when, for example, he mentioned, Twin mentioned that when our children act out, it's disruptive. See, anytime an enslaved African was not feeling well, it disrupted, as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Durr, the commodification, that I can't get my money out of you, right? And so we learn to mask, right, these feelings. And so it's a disruption for you not to do this work, but for the enslaver, right, they can have a disruption, behavior that is sadness, and they have a real issue. And so we have taken on some of that identity, and we believe ourselves to be just that, a commodity used and bought and sold for somebody else's well-being. So we don't have time to feel pain, or we just gloss over that, but I will submit that when we talk about experiences of trauma in a family, growing up, and that's what Trevor said and others said very, very clearly, growing up Black in America is a traumatizing experience. When we have to live with colorism, the dynamics of colorism that deals with color, skin color, and hair, we're perpetually traumatized in this country every day that we move. When we are told that we are intellectually inferior, we are traumatized in academic settings every single day. So it's not just simply the dynamics of trauma within a family of abuse that occurs with sexual abuse and other things, but there's a social, cultural abuse that occurs. So we're perpetually existing under the guise of trauma every single day. The issue is that we don't stop to acknowledge it. And so our responses to trauma becomes misdiagnosed as some kind of anomaly, when in reality, it is a normal human response to being traumatized. And so we have to have therapists who are in tune with this. One of the speakers spoke, in tune with the cultural views, the thoughts, ideas of a population, and we cannot expect our children, our people to live like and to function like the Europeans. The other point is, I want to say this, is that many times our folks don't go to therapy because they do not want to have themselves be put into a position to be analyzed yet again by white culture. That is, that if the therapeutic models come from the worldview of Eurocentric thought, then I'm being analyzed in that thought yet again, and I will still be marginalized and minimalized. So we have to have therapists who are clear about understanding the ethos, the worldview, the functioning, the ideology of a population, what is good for us. And I will close with this by saying that we don't have a clear picture of what we would function like if we had not been impacted by the dynamics of racism and the commodification of the human body. So it's hard to even talk about how to get back to being normal again when we have adjusted to a traumatic experience. And so we in many ways deformed. That's why I say that we can't have post-traumatic stress disorder. It is a persistent enslavement, systemic trauma that we encounter. We have to understand as therapists how to help people to navigate through those things. Or else we keep misdiagnosing our children as being disruptive and all things negative, when in reality, these are natural responses. And then there are, as Dr. Durr is saying, the organic dynamics that we must attend to. All those things are critical, but if you do not have the analysis within the cultural context, you will miss out on diagnosing a person of African descent very accurately.
Go ahead, Dr. Durr. You can respond to both questions. Trevor Noah talked about misdiagnosis, as well as, what is the process if I want to get a therapist? Talk to me about maybe some questions that I should be asking myself, be it for me as a parent and or maybe for my children.
So let me provide this sociological context. Mm-hmm. Medicine in this country was developed in order to ensure a healthy workforce for capitalists. Mm. Okay. And so we need to understand that that's what drives it. And also, therefore, in that context, that's why there's so much emphasis on the physical, but not on having a healthy command center that in order to run the rest of the physical. I want you well enough to do my work for me, but I don't necessarily want you well enough to manifest your magnificence, okay? Because that means you on your program, not mine. And that's what I'm saying, even in the context of us being brought here and made a commodity. That's for somebody else's program. That's not for my program. So there's this compartmentalization in Western medicine, as though the body is not connected. And I said, our brains are not in a separate container from the rest of your body. So the things that impact other systems, the GI system, cardiac, all these different systems, they're interacting and relating to each other, and they impact the brain like the brain impacts it. So that holistic whole perspective is missing from medicine. And so that's why you have all this focus and all these specialties on the physical parts of the body, but really kind of only 3 for the brain, right? Psychiatry, neurology, neurosurgery, right? And so it's So that part is missing. So even in terms of practitioners, there's a shortage of psychiatrists. There's a shortage of psychologists. There's about 48,000 or so board certified psychiatrists. I know there's only about 7,000 child and adolescent psychiatrists. So you take those numbers and then you extract from that an African American person. So guess who's a unicorn over here, right? Just because of the sheer numbers. I make therapy a significant part of my practice with my patients, and even my interactions, interactions with people, just kind of in the course of every day of being out. So one of the things that in my trying to work with people to get them to understand, you got to change your perspective about who you are. And I, as a therapist, can tell you wonderful and you have these unique abilities, etc. But you have to say yes to that. If I tell you to do something that's going to be helpful to you, like keep it simple, like you need to get more sleep, or you need to exercise, can be as helpful for mild to moderate depression as medication can be. But you're not doing those things that can help you, then you still have to say yes to that. So one of the things that I say to people in terms of trying to get them to understand their own unique wonderfulness is, I was like, how many flavors of ice cream are there? It's about 1,000. Does everybody like the same flavor of ice cream? No, because I don't like your flavor. Does that mean it's nasty? No. You don't like my flavor? Does that mean it's nasty? No. I said, so think of yourself, and people are just like ice cream. And just because I ain't your flavor, don't mean I ain't delicious. So we gotta reframe things. And then that's the importance of having somebody that's culturally competent. Somebody who's African American is going to understand what I said. They're going to relate to what I said, but that's not your average approach, right? It's not in terms of having the conversation in that way. It's not so you want to find out not only what somebody's training and education is, but also, again, what when I say what do they specialize in, because everybody doesn't do the same amount of work in the same areas. Some people are more specialized for trauma, some people for depression and anxiety. So those are important questions. Also, again, do you have an understanding and an appreciation for Black people? Do you love Black men? Do you love Black women? Do you love children? So those things that are going to help support and to affirm and to increase a person's sense of themselves and their worth. Those are important. Those are important. What kind of tools do you bring to the interaction that I can relate to? I got another brother here, Dr. Obari Cartman, who's a psychologist, and Obari does drum circles. He talks about the fact, I did a podcast segment with him, really, and he talked about the fact about, and of course, how that is cultural for us, and how men are not comfortable sitting necessarily talking about how I feel, because of course it's not sanctioned for men to be human, to have emotions. Like y'all are only got a brain and you're only logical, which of course that's not true. So he uses the drum circle as a means of opening the way so that there can then become to be a conversation about how I feel as a Black man and what's going on with me in my life and my emotions. So those are some other things that you want to look at in terms of what cultural things do they bring to their treatment. Can't hear you. Microphone's off.
I'm muting myself out. If you're just joining us, welcome to Drum Call. I'm the host, Dr. LaMarr Darnell Shields, host of this great podcast, Sound Bomb. We're talking with Dr. Ballin Durr, who's a board certified psychologist, and the bottom is Dr. Kevin Washington. We're gonna listen. The lines are open right now. People are getting fired up. Dr. Washington, I want to throw this out, put this question up from Brian Easy. Brian, thank you for your question and thanks for tuning in. And then we're going to pivot a little bit to Black men, Dr. Durr, and then we're going to close out with Black women and Black girls. So Brian says, what is the most common method being used by African Americans to commit suicide? Is suicide among Black people is a big problem in African nations as it is in USA? Great question, Kevin. You traveled to Africa. I've traveled to Africa. You've been there quite a bit. And Dr. Durr, if you want to respond, but Kev, I want you to take this question right here.
So the common methods, of course, we see are of course pills. What's available? Dr. Durr mentioned that very clearly that the pills typically males utilize firearm. That still remains very common. And again, I would suggest that many times Black men set up a situation by which it is a volatile situation between them and the law, them and someone else. And so that is what I would consider to be suicide by homicide. And so we see those very common practices. And then we see among the young ladies falling from, jumping from a high building, those things which are accessible to a population. Oftentimes, even we notice that individuals may find ways to drown themselves, to get into, of course, bathtubs and electrical items in there, very similar to what we've seen, or take certain drugs and then take a bath, common to what we saw with Whitney Houston and other things. So we see those things taking place within the community, very common. And suicide is not necessarily a common phenomenon or identified as such in many parts of West Africa, but it does occur. It does happen. So I don't want to say that it does not occur. It is there. It happens. It's global. It's just not in the same way. And also, I want to say that I recognize Dr. Durr. I am delicious. I heard you. So we have to understand our deliciousness. The idea of submitting. I think what you said is very critical to the content, and that is that the degree to which I can receive information that is antithetical to what I have begun to believe about myself is here. And so I have to be able to understand that what Dr. Durr has just told me is truth. For example, and Dr. Shields, I would say to individuals, I do it all the time recently. I would tell females, especially when her hair is natural, your hair is beautiful. Oh, I got to do this. No, I got to do something to it. No, it's beautiful. I like it. Oh, no, but I got to do it's not fixed yet, right? And so the idea of, even though I'm affirming what's there, she's apologizing for how it exists. And so we have this data set that tells us that something about us is broken. That's why you have to fix it. It's incorrect. It's wrong, right? It's unfair. You have fair skin, unfair skin. And so the point here is that when we understand that we are the governor, yes, the brain functions. And the reason why I say racism is an issue is because we are the governor that can discern how this functions. And this is why the work that you mentioned by Dr. Barry Cartman and Dr. Shields and I were with him just the other day interviewing the work he and I.
When she said his name, I was like, we were just in the same room.
Just in the same room. That's right. So he and I drum together. And so drumming is one of those ways of adjusting the neurochemicals in the body. It burns off the norepinephrine that you mentioned before. It causes the body to move, and it allows one to the brains to shift in a way, because you're counting, measuring, and filling in gaps and spaces with rhythm, sound, and vibration. And so that is a healing thing. So we use that for mental health. We have to understand that we are the governor that can engage in mindfulness, that we can shift how content comes in and is filtered. So yes, the brain functions, but we are the governor. The inside of that is something deeper than simply the anatomical structure called the brain. And so we then have to teach our people to gain control of that, the divinity that's within themselves, to be able to say that this data comes to me and it affirms who I am. So when somebody says that you are beautiful, to be able to receive that, and I tell students all the time, you mean to tell, no, I don't look good. You mean to tell me that you're gonna explain to me how I experience you in the now? You can't tell me how I experience you. I experience you as beautiful right now. Mm-hmm. And so the point is that we have to, in our work, in our therapeutic culture grounded work, is that we give the data, we give content, we give substance that affirms their being. And I want to submit to you this, is that if you begin to look at the success of organizations like the Nation of Islam, why can they take a population of men, since we're going into men who are incarcerated? Detroit Red and made him Malcolm X, who later becomes El Hashmi El Shabazz. How can that happen? Because it was not only him being able to filter the information, but it was content that affirmed something that he knew about himself deep within. And the best example I can give to you, talking about delicious, I give you this example, is that when we talk about a whale, If you have a water well or a carburetor, is that you always have to have a little bit of water next to the well in order for the water to come out. If you have no water there, if you pump the water, the well is dry, but there's water at the bottom of the well. And so there's water at the top that has to go down and trickle and connect with the water at the bottom, and it pulls the water up. The point is that there is this idea of knowing that I'm powerful and great, and something outside of me has to be equally matching that. It doesn't have to be a lot of it, just enough. So if enough gets poured in, once we start pumping as therapists, it'll spew out, and then it'll run on its own. But it has to be regulated around the cultural context, the essence of being. And our therapeutic work has to be grounded, when it's culturally grounded, has to be grounded in how we do our work. I will also say this, that I have done the work with the Boards of Henson Foundation, help develop the cultural competence model that organization uses, because we talk about these very things. What are the structures that therapists need to have in place in order to be able to reach our people? And first of all, you have to understand, like you said, belief in them, their capacity. You have to understand what they've gone through, and then you have to know the right languaging to be able to tap into that, to pull that essence out. Thank you.
Speaking of therapists, we have a question from Tina. Yes, there's a shortage of African-American psychologists, which is a now fix. So in the meantime, how do we then vet non-African-American psychologists and or therapists to then work with us? Go ahead, Dr. Durr.
Again, there has to be, from a basic fundamental level, a value for mental health, brain health, and thought health. And in having the value, then you can have people then start to value that as a career. So obviously, again, that's the long term. So whether it's becoming a psychologist or becoming a psychiatrist, that is the long-term answer. In terms of a shorter term, by and large, I mean, you can read people's bios. There's a lot of information that's available. There's some reviews that are available, but of course, as someone who's not, had folks always be kind to me, even in terms of my appearance in their reviews. You need to be careful about that. But just kind of going back to what Dr. Washington was saying in terms of somebody had an issue with my hair, and I'm just kind of going, that reveals your racism. Frankly, just call it what it is. So I think really, one, obviously most people are having to pick a therapist based upon their financial means. What is your insurance? You can also, of course, ask for, recommendations from other people. And there's obviously, for instance, the Psychologists Association. They have both a national association and a local. So Dr. Abari Cartman is the head of the Chicago chapter of the Black Psychologists. So look for those kinds of associations in order to find people of color. There's also that kind of association for, Black psychiatrists as well. So look for those kinds of associations to find people of color. Beyond that, those things, I think you're probably really in a position of scheduling appointments with them, or either calling their office and saying, if you have an idea about what kind of approaches you use, does this person employ these kinds of approaches in their care of patients? And then beyond that, of course, it's just meeting with them to find out, is it really a good fit or not? And so,
great suggestions. Great, Dr. Durr. Since Dr. Washington talked about Black men and somewhat Black boys, Dr. Durr, I know you probably watched the TV show Scandal, and there's a scene where Olivia Pope's father tells her in Scandal, as a Black woman, you have to be twice as good as them to get half of what they have. We know this sentiment rings true for every Black woman. Black parents from decades have told their daughters that they have to be twice as smart, twice as independent, twice as talented, twice as good, twice if they want to succeed despite racial discrimination. And with that being said, we also know that there's suicide amongst Black girls is a mental health crisis, but it's hiding in plain sight. Why is this so? And what message do you have for those parents that are out there that are raising these Black and brown girls? And also for these women like you who are working in corporate America, who is also struggling with this intersectionality of being in one space and trying to be who they are?
So first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge, and Dr. Washington kind of alluded to this already. One, my ability to affect you comes from proximity and access. So one of the things that's always a concern for me, and I, you know, as a child psychiatrist, I frankly tell my parents this: don't bring your kids in here asking me to fix them when you as a parent got your own work that you need to do. Because if the environment remains the same, and I've taken a child and helped them get better, but put them back into a dysfunctional environment, guess what's going to happen? And so, you know, as adults, we need to heal our own childhood wounds. And because you can only give somebody what you have. And if what you have is woundedness and angst and anger and frustration and whatever, guess what's coming out of you? It's like a volcano. When it erupts, it ain't erupting soap bubbles. It's erupting ash, toxic fumes, lava, rocks. That's what's coming out of it. So, and part of that also too is when you lack self-esteem. It's called self-esteem for a reason. We're gaining esteem though from the community, from our families, from teachers, from other people around us. But we also have to understand that we have free will. And because I have free will, as what Dr. Washington was alluding to, I get to decide what I believe is true for me and what's not. So again, somebody can tell me you're amazing and wonderful with all these possibilities and the God potential within you. And I have the ability to say yes or no. Just as a child, if you tell a child, you know, don't touch the stove because it's hot, and the child goes, some children will go, okay. Some children go, let me see for myself. So we need to understand that we have that free will to choose what we allow into our beliefs and what we don't, and what we reject as belief, right? It's the same as I said, somebody offered me cocaine years ago. It was up to me to say no thank you to that offer, or to accept the offer. So it's again coming back to the issue of, you know, how do we do that? Is we have to be mindful of course, what's going on in the home, and that's how do you help? The other thing too is parents tend to parent top down, and that's where the disconnect is. So as a parent, if I'm just telling you to do this, do that, don't do the other, then I don't know what my child is thinking, how my child is feeling, or what they're doing. I don't know they're getting beat up. I don't know that they're getting sexually abused. I don't know that they're smoking or using drugs or drinking or whatever else is happening to them that's potentially harmful. You know, something happened with my son a number of years ago. He's now a teenager, and he was much younger. I bought him a t-shirt, and the t-shirt he's wearing, it says, "I am awesome." And some little boy told him, "No, you're not." And that hurt his feelings. And I had to have a conversation with him about that. And what I realized though for me is somebody's always pouring into my child, and I better make sure it's largely me, and what's being poured into him is what I want poured into him, as opposed to what society is pouring into him. So we have to help. We have to be connected to children, which is one of the disconnect and the social isolation is again one of the risk factors for suicide. So I need to be pouring into my child. I need to be connected to them. I need to be telling them that who you are at your core is beautiful. Do not rely upon the things that in this existence that are temporary in terms of your physical appearance and what you have and who you know and you're connected, but you have purpose and you have potential. That's the kind of stuff that needs to be built. And because girls tend to internalize stuff, that's why that's one of the reasons they internalize stuff. But we also see a difference in the change in rates of depression and suicide once puberty kicks in. Before that, it's equal. Boys and girls are the same. After that is when you see with depression is 2 times as many girls that are depressed as the boys. And then of course we got this huge increase of about 50% last year from like February to March in suicides because of the pandemic. And suicide rates of people going, the kids going to the emergency rooms. because of the pandemic. And again, it's social isolation and it's disconnection.
Well, speaking of disconnection,
those things.
So speaking of disconnection, as we wrap up, we have about 10 minutes left, and we want to get to prevention. But before we do that, you talked a little bit about this, and I want to unpack a book by Mark Wolin. It's called "It Didn't Start with You: How Inherited Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle." Can we talk, Dr. Washington? Can we talk about ancestral trauma? Because when I think of the great poet, the great hip hop artist Kendrick Lamar, he talks about it's in your DNA. We can look at an image of a person, be like, I thought that was me. No, that was your grandmother. I thought that was me. That was your auntie. So we have all these images, right, Dr. Durr? When you look at your daughter, she looks like somebody else. But if we can have that connection, Dr. Washington, then why can't we inherit trauma? And this great book talks about how we inherited this trauma. Let's talk about ancestral trauma, and then we're going to talk about some strategies that we can sort of move forward. Go ahead, Doc.
So it's a powerful piece. I want to say Dr. Durr mentioned something that I think is important also about putting a fixed piece into a broken system. That's important to recognize that once we bring somebody into a therapeutic setting, they have to be, the system has to function well. And Dr. Shields, you do a wonderful job of this. You actually put your children in an environment that is communal, that they know that they have us to go to, and your children have come to me. One is told on you, right? But the point is that she knew that she could do that.
Oh no, we're about to stop the show. I'm just playing. Go ahead.
I'm
You're
just
part of
saying,
the village. That village is that team. We're talking about creating a team. When the show is over, you better tell me who that was. No, go ahead.
Right. So they came and told on you. But the point I'm making here is that that's why when I do therapy, it's not about the person, it's about the entire system. As an African-centered model, it says that everybody's involved in this process. And so I just wanted to reiterate that piece. State your question again, because there were several lines that were there. Oh, transgenerational trauma. So what we know is that a study done by Diaz and Resler suggests to us, epigenetics tells us that it is possible for mice to pass down trauma responses. That is, that mice that would have a shock, and then they would have a smell of orange blossom, associated that orange blossom with the pain of the shock. So when they would have the smell of the orange blossom, they would have a visceral response as if they were being shocked, though they were not shocked. These mice would have pups, and these pups would have the orange blossom smell, but no shock, and their bodies would have a visceral response to that orange blossom, though they never experienced the shock before in their lives. Further, the next generation of mice, the pups, would have the similar experience to the orange blossom, where it tells us that at some level, we have the capacity to transfer trauma responses, though there's no direct experience of the trauma. And this is the work out of epigenetics, epigenetics that tells us about this. But Resler told me also, he said that we found that we can pass down or transmit ways of addressing and or circumventing the experiences of trauma genetically as well. He said that the same mice that had this experience of the orange blossom, we then taught them a response to that, and they passed down their response to that particular traumatic that reminder. And so the point then is for us to know that therapy and ways of being are also ways of can be transmitted genetically as well. So we think about the negative, the pain, but also think about the idea of the healing that can be transmitted down the line. And I would submit that if you're looking for a therapist, and you have to go to a non-black therapist, because every black therapist ain't black. I want to be clear about that one. Because you can be of the same color, out of the same kind. So I want to be clear.
Repeat that, por favor. Repeat that one.
Exactly right. Every black therapist ain't black. There are organizations, like was mentioned, was Association of Black Psychologists. It's amazing that there's a Latino Psychological Association that exists. The Society of Indigenous or Indian Psychologists. There's the Asian American Psychologists Association. So all these organizations even exist that look at the cultural relevance of the healing practices, and yet the documentary or the information says that we don't have enough because we have a system that can kill individuals coming through the system. And so sometimes to get through, we destroy our own cultural awareness. And so we can be anatomically black, but still psychologically another space. That's Kobe Campbell's work about being misoriented. So I want to be clear about that. So we have to understand that if you have to go to a therapist that doesn't look like you, ask the question fundamentally about how do they feel about racism. And if they tell you that they don't see color, you get the hell out of there right there, because they have not acknowledged your presence, right? The idea is that a part of my experience is tied to that. So you get up and you leave. So you ask questions about what is your experience with racism? How do you understand certain things about culturality, nuances, and those kind of things? You test them the way you test. And Dr. Shields, you have a powerful a mechanism that you talked about that you got from a brother Haki Matabuti about examining what's on the walls, what's in the space. The same thing when you go to a therapist's office. If you don't see images that look like you in that office, you don't see Ebony Essence, Jet magazine, or something on the table somewhere. Check where you are, because you might not be in the right spot, right? So the point is that the idea of therapeutic healing has all those components to it, and so we have to be mindful around those things.
Man, I love Kimberly Peterson's response, like different perspective. And I love that you guys' energy and so fun, even though this is a serious issue, you got to sort of look at some of this stuff. We know that it was music. We know there was comedy. We know there was the spirit. We knew that there was spiritual music that really kept us working as we worked on these plantations. As Dr. Durr said, it was created for profit, power, and pleasure. So we're about to wrap up shortly. Dr. Durr, I want you to respond to the same question. And then as you begin to wrap up, give our listeners all your contact information that is coming in out, and I'll try to get another question in. Go ahead, Dr. Durr.
So can you just repeat the question for me again, please?
So we talked about ancestral trauma. We talked about inheriting that and being passing it on. And then let's talk about some strategies. How can we sort of, because people always say this curse, this curse, like the Kennedys are cursed, like the Kennedys are cursed. Well, then the Jacksons are cursed, and the Jones are cursed, and then the Williams are cursed. But we talk about ancestral trauma. What are some strategies?
Generational curse, right? Yeah, in terms of religion. So two things. And the epigenetics that Dr. Washington referenced is definitely very much a part of that. And for anybody who might not be familiar with epigenetics is the field that says that we have genes, but our genes don't control us or run us. We're not subject to them and have no say-so or control over it. So what they've discovered again is based upon thought, feeling, and then action. And action can be something as simple as, then what am I eating? I can turn genes off and on. That's what epigenetics is. So a simple example of that in the physical is the fact that somebody may be predisposed of having heart attacks, in late 30s, early 40s. And why does that happen for some people but not for others? And the reason it doesn't happen for some people is because they've altered their diet. They have a diet that's consistent with a heart healthy diet plus exercise. So it does not turn those genes on. Where somebody who's eating a diet that may be, high in the wrong kinds of fat and cholesterol and lipids and those kind of things turns those genes on, and then they get the heart attacks. So that's an example of epigenetics. So in terms of generational, we need to understand that with trauma literally changes brain structure and function. You're actually getting wiring that's now like this, and it's wiring and firing together and recreating the trauma. And then how that stuff gets, those brain cells do that is through genes. So again, those genes can be passed on, as Dr. Washington said, and then you can have those responses. Well, if you're having those kinds of responses, again, you're also getting deficits or difficulties in the way the brain functions. Another part, though, of the generation, what's passed upon generationally, is how do children learn? By copying what they see, right? They tell you, don't do as I say, not as I do, doesn't work, because you are a model. You're demonstrating how to be a woman, how to be a mother, how to be a man, how to be a father. So the children are also copying patterns that they see. And so part of the pattern that you can be copying, for instance, is if there's a physical abuse going on in the home, and I know it happens both to men and women, but more women than men. If you have a mother that's being abused by the father, that way of relating to each other is being demonstrated and therefore copied potentially by the girls and the boys, because they're identifying with one or the other. Oh, this is what I can expect from a relationship as a woman. Oh, this is how a man is supposed to treat his woman. So those are other difficulties in what happens in terms of quote unquote curse. And what you have to do is you have to stop and recognize, is this really what I want for my life? Is this really what the standards and values that I want to embody, right? And consciously in an aware way say yes or no. Conscious and aware way say, I don't feel good. I don't feel happy. What kind of things do I need to do in order for that to happen? So for me, one of the important things to address about suicide is nutrition. I say that because our brain, like our car, needs certain things to function and operate well, right? So it was mentioned, one of the things that Trevor mentioned, to go back to that, was about Black folks being traumatized by living in the North. Well, what's the joke? But the reality is 70% of people that live north of Atlanta are vitamin D deficient. Vitamin D does many things, including help prevent depression and anxiety, chronic pain, migraine headaches, and also boost your immune system. So vitamin D is important to your brain health. Selenium, zinc, chromium, sometimes, and also magnesium. Sometimes somebody might need iron or not. But these are things because you need two things to build a good or great product. You need quality raw materials and quality workmanship. So give your brain the things that it needs. Already, we mentioned sleep. Actually, sleep deprivation is a risk, and I forgot to mention that earlier, but sleep deprivation is actually a risk factor for suicide, right? Then again, also get exercise. Do omega-3 fatty acids. Again, omega-3 fatty acids is something, it's actually an anti-inflammatory. The other thing your brain needs is it needs blood flow, right? So ginkgo is something else that you can take too. There's a product that I use, it's called Memory and Brain that works great. But give your brain and your body the vitamins and the minerals and the proteins and the sleep and the environment, the things that it needs in order to function, help to be healthy, to create healthy brain structures and to function well. Then there are the thoughts we think. Okay. And the thoughts that we think, the things that we need to change, again, start about being connected to self. Start with the things about you can do to affirm yourself, to improve your self-esteem, that you can be, and that you can also connect to others. One of the things that I use a lot is I tell people to meditate. And meditation is about going inward so that you can regulate what's going on outside of you, because for every action you take, you always successful. That's how you got to change the way you think. Why you're always successful? Because every time you take an action, you create a result. So you are always successful. It's just a lot of times we create we don't want instead of creating results we do want, right? So
that's what I meant by the governor right there. That's the governor. Meditation, that's the governor. Go ahead. Yeah.
Tune into you so you can be aware of what you're thinking and how you feeling and what you're doing. So is it consistent to the results I want or not? And meditation doesn't always involve being still. Meditation can also be washing a dish. I've had the most amazing experience just being completely immersed in the activity and the soap and the water and the feel of the dish. That's meditation, is being completely and fully aware and engaged and immersed in what we're doing. And most of us live up in our head on an alternate reality that we didn't create it that's not necessarily consistent with truth. And so we need to come out of our heads, come off of Fantasy Island with Mr. Rourke and tattoo and the cray-cray dysfunctional stuff that we think and believe, and center ourselves within our higher selves, that all-knowing, all-powerful presence that's always present. So we need to do those things that take care, that love and affirm. And frankly, give yourself some unconditional love. We want people to give to us what we don't give to ourselves. And like, can you imagine if I would have said, I don't like me, I really can't stand me, but I want you to. You'd be like, what's wrong with you? Right? If you look in the mirror twice a day and say, I love you. And most people are going to have trouble with that. because they have confused their identity with what they do or what was done to them. They have confused their who and their do. And so when you look at yourself, it's not the physical self, it's to look into your eyes and to discover, to know the deeper being that you are, and to love you unconditionally for that being. What most people look in there, and this what's going to come up as an that's what I call it. It's a condition. I can't because of this. That's a condition. And you need to learn how to stop withholding love from yourself for whatever reasons you come up with. That's why it's called unconditional love. Learn to love on you. Do that at least twice a day. And if you're not willing to do that at least twice a day, then you need to be questioning why you withholding that from you. Why is it okay that in terms of your guilt and shame that people cherry pick the evidence to say I did this and I did that, or I didn't do this, or I screwed this up, so that I'm gonna pound on myself for the rest of my days because I won't forgive myself for something that I did that it was done to me. You got to deal with that guilt and that shame. And again, understand that just because you need help, that's all it means, that you need help. It doesn't mean you're crazy. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you need help. It doesn't mean you don't know how to do it for yourself. So be okay with getting help.
There we go. I love your strategies. I told you all to write them down. I hope you wrote them down in your notebook or on your phone. Dr. Ballin, Durr, let our listeners know how they can get in contact with you, and then your final thoughts, Dr. Washington.
Okay. So also, I have a podcast that I did. It's available, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprouts, and all the other platforms. It's called Today's Mental Health. And there are 3 segments: depression, suicide, and addictions. So if you want some more information, and where I talk about very even simple things about what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist. So giving basic information in addition to talking about the topics. Then again, you can reach me on social media, Ballin A, Durr, MD. And I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And then also I have a book which you can see behind me over here with the black rocks, and it's called Heaven Abounds in You: The Journey to Joy. It is on Amazon, and then I also have a YouTube page with the same name, Heaven Abounds in You with Dr. Durr. And they're about 5-minute videos that again are designed to awaken and empower you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. So we were all designed to live in the sweet spot. We are the divine one of the universe appearing as us with infinite potential, just waiting to do it if we can get this together, right? As Morpheus said, you got to let it all go, Neo. Fear, doubt, and disbelief. Free your mind.
There we go. Dr. Washington, close us out, brother.
The powerful words, and I want to say that this was in concert, the conversation about the governor. What I was talking about was not necessarily your thoughts, but understanding the vibratory frequency that it resides within. And so when we talk about strategies for success, strategies for navigating spaces, strategies for getting through certain things, we must recognize that we are the divine ones, that we are sacred and divine, that we have to recognize that on every turn. We talk about things that people can do. I encourage people to engage in, if your thing is spoken word, as you had a poet talk earlier about wait and dance, then do that. Write your poems down, do the spoken word, and that way you can hear what's happening, what's going on with you, what's in your inner space, because people die more from what's eating them than from what they're eating. Along the lines of that, a study was done in the University of Cleveland, suggested that the people who eat 3 to 5 servings of fruits a day are happier. So you said something very powerful earlier, Dr. Durr, about the idea of understanding what you consume and what you're feeding. So you may be feeding depression, you may be feeding heart disease, but if you're feeding something else, you're actually destroying it. So 3 to 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day have been shown to make people feel happier or lighter. So write your thoughts down. Journaling, if you're not a spoken word artist, journal, put things down so that you can externalize what you said has been internalized. A very powerful ritual that we have to engage in. Also understand that there are other physical activities. You mentioned earlier about the washing the dishes, for example. Washing dishes can be therapeutic. We all have our things of therapy, movement, dance therapy, drumming. We find those things that bring us peace, that allow us to be able to vibrate in a very different way. These are strategies that we have to engage in. Also, check the music you're listening to, because I know that I listen to different music when I'm having to go do different things. So when I know that I got to go and I got to face somebody that I don't want to really deal with on this day, I have to have some warrior music. Some days I want to mellow out, right? And parts of the day are very different. So check what you're listening to. That was the rapper. Check what is going into your system. So these are things that we can do to have strategies for success. Also, you mentioned you have a book on the shelf. All what you put in, it will come out. Life, the mind is like a garden. Whatever you plant, something will grow. So get the sister's book about the journey within, the joy, the power, the well, all of that. It's a powerful title. Read, put substance in so that it'll come out. If you plant 10 rows of cotton, 10 rows of corn, you can't go pick watermelon. So whatever you put in is what you can be able to get out. So the point is, what do you put into your system? And so we have to have those things, because those things will indeed come out as we go throughout our lives. So I encourage people to journal, to engage in spoken word, to engage in activities such as dance, drumming, those things. Also be able to engage in bibliotherapy, take in some substance, some things that will empower you and uplift you. And always remember to have a circle of individuals who are able to encourage you to be able to become your best self, because the body gets sick one cell at a time. And I'm convinced that one cell tells other cell, are you sick? And the cell says, yes, I'm sick. But the body gets well the same way, one cell at a time. So we always have to recognize who is in our circle, who is around us, and what are we talking about, what are we conversing about. I heard as a child, and it stuck with me, it says that small minds talk about each other, average minds talk about events, ideas, other things, and large minds talk about ideas and what they're going to do, right? So the point is that if you're in a space where you're always talking about people, then there's a problem. And I love what you said, because I said all the time about the unconditional love for self, that you can never expect me to do more for you than you're willing to do for yourself. If you don't love yourself without condition, don't expect me to do the same thing, right? And so the point is that we have to learn how to love ourselves without placing conditions upon what it is that we see. We embrace the power of the divine within. We first have to recognize, what I suggest is that we are divine, and that there's no other way to explain it. After we talk about the historical legacy of being oppressed, sodomized, brutalized, beaten, so forth and so on, we are still here, that we are able to engage in a conversation in an alien language and understand one another, speaks to the divinity that's within. If that's not divine, if that's not enough to celebrate on this day, I don't know what is. So we have to learn to recognize our divinity, and then everything else will follow. Or as Parliament says, free your mind and your behind will follow. And so we have to be clear about that. We have to free our minds from the oppressor, because the greatest weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. That was Stephen Biko. Thank you.
Wow. Well, I told you.
Can I just add one thing, which is simply this is, when we're in these depressed and anxious states, again, like I said, you have brain cells up here that are in the frontal brain that are dying, and then the part of the brain that generates that negative thinking can take over. One of the things it convinces you of is that you are alone. And the fact of the matter is we are never alone. There's one, the creator is always with us, but there's also 7.5 billion people on the planet, and somebody is experiencing, if not the same thing, something that's similar to what you're experiencing. So never think that you are isolated without someone who does not understand what you are going through. And I didn't have a chance to talk about it, but me, myself, I've had bouts of depression, and even a point when I had what we call passive suicidal thoughts, which is, I just don't want to wake up. I wish I could just stay asleep, kind of thing. So it happens to even the people that you think it would never happen to. So recognize, because of that, there's somebody else who's going through what you've been through. And so your experience, when I say it's okay, meaning it's not abnormal in the sense that nobody else it's never happened to anybody else. So please reach out and get some help if you need it. Please.
Well, that is a great way to end the show. I want to just make some virtual noise for Dr. Ballin Durr and Dr. Kevin Washington. Brother Thabiti Boone he was having a couple of technical difficulties, so he couldn't join us. He was also dealing with his allergies, so he was really, really nasal. I just want to thank all of you all for hanging out with us today, for going a little over, because again, this stuff is important. It's encouraging to find that there's an increasing awareness worldwide of the importance of addressing mental health issues. So I thank you for joining us here at Drum Call, the Crisis of Black Suicide and Mental Health. If you like what you heard today, go out and tell someone. But check out my podcast, Sound Bombing. Every Monday, we post a new show. So check out the amazing people that I have on. Again, Dr. Washington, Dr. Durr, I want to thank you. And everybody else, go out and do something for someone other than yourself. Please, please, please invest in your mental health. I appreciate you. I love you. And you can do nothing about it. Peace.